Whoa, what a coincidence. A Choose Your Legends 8 video when the Choose Your Legends 8 banner's up? What are the odds of that? And did I look at the data mine to find that out? Yes, no. Yes. I've been in a yapping mood for who knows how long at this point, and I was thinking to myself, it's probably a good idea to talk about Choose Your Legends 8 today, and I need a bunch of people to disagree with me in the comment section. Also, if you want me to yap about anything, then let me know in the comment where you tell me why I'm wrong. Choose Your Legends 8, they certainly came and went, and they're still here. I lied, they never left. That said, I do think a lot of them definitely changed in viability and usability and something ability over the course of at least whenever they came out to now, and I wanted to talk about it because I was like, whoa, people like these units. These are units people like. So I'm going to go in my own perceived order of who I believe is currently the best Choose Your Legends 8 unit, all the way to the worst one, while also talking about what made them so good in the past, or what made them really bad in the past, and what really makes them good now, or really bad now. But I also just want to say, for the record, I don't think the worst one on the list is actually the worst unit ever, and they suck, and blah blah blah. It's just that everything just moves way too fast nowadays for a unit to really just be good anymore. They gotta be like 20 billion different things, and that sucks. But if we had to start with anybody on this list, and it's my list, so I get to choose the order, I'm gonna start with Bernadetta. I mentioned it in a video several months back about the units I believe to be the most underrated of their book, and I definitely mentioned Bernadetta, especially since she was in the thumbnail. I had to mention Bernadetta, but I did always feel like she was really underrated from the Brave batch. Obviously, Felix and Robin were definitely the highlights of that batch, and Alphonse was the people actually liked. Bernadetta, I felt like really went under the radar, in one part due to the fact that her base kit looked like this, and yeah, I would not be impressed with a unit if they had a base kit like this. Not to mention the trailer was her barely killing Emblem Mike when he was about to fade out anyway, so that didn't give a lot of people good impressions. And the other part of it being, it's Bernadetta. And look, I get it, making fun of Bernadetta is kinda funny. It's usually pretty funny. But I do feel like this gave a nasty impression of Brave Bernadetta because in reality, while she definitely wasn't Felix and Robin good, she wasn't really that far behind, all things considered. Combat niche-wise, she had dual phase Brave, which Brave is always just going to be good no matter what. But she also had Paranoia, which meant that she could always get 4 attacks in the player phase. She could Vantage against any ranged nuke, and this is especially important, I'll mention this in a second. She also had Canto Distance 3, so she was just a naturally good hit-and run unit. She was generally competent in basically every single mode, potentially barring Arena, but Arena scoring is not a factor in a unit's viability. That being said, Paranoia is arguably what made her really good, even before now, which the usage in it definitely changed over the course of time, but it still has attributing factors nowadays. The biggest thing about Paranoia back when she first came out is that she was able to checkmate basically every single range unit in the entire game in summoner duels, because you couldn't reliably initiate onto her, so she could keep moving in your face. And if you just happen to not have any melee units on your team at that point, it was really easy for her to checkmate the rest of your team. And that's not even getting into the topic of Shield Fighter, because part of the reason why a lot of these Shield Fighter units ran Hardy Bearing Seal is because if they didn't, they died to Bernadetta. 4 attacks back to back with Paranoia meant that Shield Fighter was not going to protect them in the 4th hit, and more often than not, they just didn't have the bulk to survive because she had 2 layers of true damage. Nowadays with the snakes, it's definitely a lot harder for her to do anything against those types of units, but Shield Fighter specifically with stuff like Fiorm, it was really easy for her to checkmate a lot of those, which is also why she counter played that to run Miracle. She was just a really good nuke for the most part, and she also had really good mixed phase utility that allowed her to at least stand out in summoner duels. But her combat niche would fall off significantly because not only were armors just even harder to kill and she couldn't really do any damage to them, a lot of player phase units just had a significant amount of true DR, so her vantage sweeping stuff against ranged units definitely became a lot harder, and she would eventually just get phased out more or less. However, now with all the stupid high threat range stuff that will completely murder you if they initiate combat, Paranoia made a return because it is a really good defensive mechanism against these types of units. We do not have enough tools that isn't just Ice or Paranoia to really survive against a lot of this stuff these days, because a lot of them have to overcompensate for some of the bulkiest armors in the game. Now, because of that, a lot of defensive tools are just not really good in something like summoner duels. And this has sort of put Paranoia in this renaissance arc, because Paranoia before was really just Bernadetta taking advantage of it, and now it's a lot more units taking advantage of it, because we also have stuff like Emblem Erica and other units that are in Emblem Erica, I don't remember all of them offhand, that really like Paranoia because now they don't have to eat 5 hits potentially against a baby Camilla or 4 hits against a Yunaka. And while her own personal combat has still taken a pretty big hit, I don't think it would be a stretch to say that Bernadetta is currently the best of the batch. Even if it is very Summoner Duel specific, she's still okay for hit and run stuff for Aether Raids at least, but the biggest claim to fame is definitely her niche in Summoner Duels with Paranoia. And in a similar case to all of this, we have Robin, who is kind of in a weird spot to me. I always felt that Robin and Felix were basically on the same level, whereas Felix had really, really good combat, Robin had really, really good support. She was basically on so many Aether Raids defense teams because that Ice utility was really, really good, and on top of Hush Spectrum and Panic. This utility also carried over to Summoner Duels because, who guessed it, Ice and Hush Spectrum and Panic is pretty good for the most part. The only thing that was really iffy about Robin was her combat, and I never really thought that was her strongest suit. She might be able to get kills back when she came out, but she's not really the most reliable, and I would not even risk trying to make her into a combat unit. Her support's definitely the biggest highlight of her. However, she fell off really fast with the introduction of Emblem Lyn, because in Aether Raids, what's the point of the ice if you could just shoot from the beginning area of the map? Not to mention her Emblem Ring effect, which allowed a lot of other users to remove the ice through terrain setting, like Deadly Miasma. There was a lot of ways getting around her in Aether Raids at that point, and it really didn't make sense to use her after that. Not to mention, Ice Lock in that same month meant that her biggest contributing factor was now an inheritable on a staff unit, meaning that you didn't really have to run Robin specifically. If you could free up slots by putting a lot of the effects on another unit that's just better, that's always going to be the go-to, and that's how she lost a lot of her viability. However, in a similar case to Bernadetta, we kept getting a bunch of stupidly high threat range units, which meant that Robin ended up having a niche again despite Ice Lock existing. Not for Aether Raids specifically, but again, for Summoner Duels. Her debuffs were still fine as is, but the biggest difference between what Robin does to set ice and what Ice Lock does is that Robin is significantly faster. She could get it up easily 1 turn faster than Ice Lock, and 1 turn may not sound fast, but for something like Summoner Duels, it's really fast. And the biggest reason why you would still want to use Robin over an Ice Lock unit is because it was just a lot more flexible. You could easily do something like a Repo or Smite on any unit, and they'd immediately have ice next to them. She could easily just end her turn and the ice would form around her, and it didn't really require as much precise positioning as Ice Lock does, even though it's still not the hardest thing to do with Ice Lock. Robin was just a lot more flexible, and because of its flexible nature, you were able to put a halt to a lot of Yunaka Sakura teams, which was really good because, fun fact, they're still around and they're really annoying. It really is just a response to all this offensive pressure we have in the meta right now, because besides Saviors, Ice really is the most reliable way of defending yourself against a lot of these units. We do have stuff like Valentine's Rhea, but there's not really anything else I can imagine that goes to that extreme for it to be worth using. And that's also why I think Robin is still pretty good, despite going from like, we're so back, it's so over, and we're back again. Really good time, isn't it? Now, I need to preface this before people get mad at me, and they're gonna get mad at me regardless, but I'm gonna say it anyway. I don't believe that any of the Brave units were bad on launch. Not at all. I think at the worst, they were still good. So when I say that Brave Alphonse was definitely the worst of the 4 Brave units on that batch, I'm not saying it's because Alphonse was bad. It's because the other 3 just had a lot more going for them. But I did have a lot of criticisms about him. Alphonse debuted as an Axe Cavalry unit who tried to be a lot of things in one, but couldn't really excel in either role he was given in. He had all the player face chops of being able to move 4 spaces and canto distance, and the whole idea is that he was supposed to swing onto something and turn, and then enemy phase a bunch of units while trying to build up his great talent stats, which was the biggest highlight about him. He was supposed to be a snowball unit who also attempted to be Emblem Ike when Emblem Ike was already getting phased out of the meta. And it's not like he couldn't tank stuff or kill stuff, but it was definitely the most unreliable part about him, which was the problem because he was trying to be both things. Attempting to be a one-shot unit in this day and age, even when he came out, really wasn't the most reliable thing because he would often miss kills. Not to mention the big snowball effect that came with his great talent effect, which required him to get his special off so many times for it to max out, but it was often slow, which didn't really make it the most reliable. Brave Alphonse, in my eyes, was not only a unit that made himself into a wall, he also made every single foe into a wall, which is why I was never really the highest on him. That being said, despite all of my criticisms with the unit, I actually believe he aged pretty well. Not that he'll become really meta or anything, but he's honestly way more usable now than he probably wasn't when he came out. And the way to do something like that is by entirely getting rid of his enemy phase potential. He is a really bulky player phase unit. If you needed somebody to reliably initiate onto a unit, he was generally one of the better units that could do that. Now with the newer additions like Assault Force, Blue Skies, I mean Fatal Smoke is not new, but with all the stuff going around, Fatal Smoke and Erica Ring, I actually believe he's a pretty competent player phase nuke. I think one of the biggest things that was holding him back was his reliance on one-shots, and having it also be tied to his B slot meant that he was also getting less bulk if he was doubling, which was just a really poor combination. Getting rid of all of that, stacking up even more true damage, you can keep Makings of a King if you want to for extra stats, Erica Ring for Brave, you can run Frozen support, which isn't exclusive to benefiting Alphons, but it does help him a lot. He can actually hit stupidly hard, which is great. The only caveat really being that if you wanted to run him as an enemy phase unit, then you gotta cope. Honestly, if I had the resources for it, I would probably consider actually using him. But again, he's definitely far from anything remotely meta, but if you did want to use him now, I do think he has the qualifications for it, and the biggest contributing factor to it is that he also doesn't need the Sigurd ring. He could just naturally move 4 spaces, and he can run away with 4 spaces, meaning that he has a free ring to do basically whatever he wants. So for what it's worth, I don't think he's the worst Brave unit now. I think that goes to Felix. I talked about this in another video about Felix and him falling off, and yeah, he's still common, but I think that's less on the idea of like Felix being good common and more like he's a Brave unit. Brave units are common. That's just a thing. And I do think it's worth reiterating, I don't think he's a bad unit, but I also think he's a noob trap at this point. And the biggest thing with that really is if you do have the counter and it's not hard to counter him, he completely folds. The biggest thing that really made him as stupid as he was back in the day, and I say back in the day as if it's been so long, 3 months is a long time for a lot of these units, honestly, was the Celica ring. Celica ring meant that he was able to abuse so much of his kit that I would argue that if Celica ring was not a thing when Felix came out, he would have never been as good as he was. He was a phenomenal Aether Raids unit in both offense and defense. He could trap gamble with basically no issues whatsoever. He could Gale Force so many times. He had pretty decent bulk, so he could actually take hits. He had a lot of damage output. He was really good at doing a lot of things, especially on the defense side where it was really easy to get a lot of units, and I would actually say his best role is still in Aether Raid's defense because it's really easy to get the jump on people, and then boom, no more left loss potentially. Hopefully, potentially, I don't know. It's just a really easy thing for him to be in a reinforcement slot, and then he could do a bit of cleanup, especially on offense with the extra Gale Force thing, but neither here nor there. In Summoner duels, his Gale Force capabilities were actually really valuable because if the foe could not deal with him, he could get 2 free kills off their team, and at that point, it was really hard to deal with him. He was a really good unit, and I would still say he is pretty useful. But it's also undeniable that he fell off significantly. Even beyond his killing and tanking capabilities, Shield Fighter near saves were able to check him really easily. They started releasing a bunch of anti-warp skills that were inheritable, so that got rid of his Celica niche. On top of the fact that his Pure F skill was a B slot, which if it were any other slot, I would actually argue he'd have some sort of niche because he'd be able to run pass. And with his Gale Force niche just actually being a bane now in Summoner duels, I have no qualms in really saying he's the worst Choose Your Legends 8 unit, but again, I don't think he's actually that bad. At the very least, he's probably the most convenient unit for PvE stuff. I use him all the time for that stuff. Doing daily, story maps, whatever else with events that aren't related to Aether Raids and Summoner duels, he's still probably the best of the 4 in that regard, and if you need somebody that's just a really easy unit to plug and play, he's definitely the best one. Probably then followed by Alphonse and Bernadetta because they also have high threat range and Canto distance, so it's really nice there. Robin's Ice is pretty good, but you don't really need it for anything but Summoner duels in my opinion. That said, I do think when it comes to the current batch of Choose Your Legends 8 units, I would probably say Bernadetta is the best one, followed by Robin, Alphonse, and Felix. And if you feel like you disagree with any of this stuff, then you can tell me why I'm stupid and wrong for thinking these stupid and wrong things that I think are actually right and correct. But I don't want to leave you hanging without any sort of takeaway message. The takeaway message from this entire video is that isn't power creep great, especially at the pace it's going at? No, the end.
You think this is a game?